This evening, Cheryl's going to be sharing with us stories and song from her tradition and her community. And so the word lecture is used quite loosely. Tonight, those of you, there's a number of familiar faces, and so I know a number of you have been to the Linlathen lecture here at the church before. And so those who have know that I'm pretty proud of being a Valley girl. I'm not just Ottawa Valley born and bred, I'm Lanark County born and bred. And I was away for many, many years, and it's been a privilege to come back home and be back in the Valley and rediscover what that part of me and my heritage. In fact, I proudly identify myself as an Ottawa Valley girl around the world. When I'm at conferences and you're supposed to say where you're from, it says Ottawa Valley. This is a special place with a special culture. Most of us who are gathered here tonight, not all of us, but most of us are immigrant peoples. Whether that immigration happened in the 20th, 21st century, sometimes passing through multiple places on this continent, or like my Scots and Irish ancestors, 18th, 19th centuries here to the Valley. And I know personally that there are some people in this room whose ancestors immigrated here in the 17th century. It's a long time ago in my culture. But there are people who were here before our ancestors, those of us who came from elsewhere, for centuries beyond memory, and whose descendants are still here, who are a part of this land. When I returned back to the Valley 9 years ago, I realized that although the word Algonquin was sewn into my Ontario, another Indigenous word, into my Ontario identity, Algonquin is home, right? Algonquin, for those of us who are from this part of Ontario, that's our word, right? Algonquin, that's home. I realized when I came back that I actually knew very little about the Algonquin peoples, or the Ojibwe, the Anishinaabe. I knew nothing about the Ardoch Algonquin community. I don't even know how to say it correctly still. I'm still learning this Nimikobi community here in Lanark County, the Sharbot, Obajidwan. And I thought, I'm going to trip over these words because I'm standing in front of people, and I thought, actually, that's good because I'm still learning. And we are still learning. We've got much to learn. But these are communities that are here in Frontenac, in Lanark, that I knew nothing about growing up here in the Valley. And it wasn't until I started doing intentional research myself, discovered these communities of people who were here long before my ancestors. The relationship between the Indigenous and immigrant peoples all over this place we call Canada is complicated, and the political, social, economic challenges are still many. Opportunities like this evening are opportunities to build relationship, which is a gift. Those of you who are currently in and out of Ontario universities or maybe government institutions are familiar with the act of recognizing the story of the lands on which we gather, on which some of us now live. Those of you in and out of those institutions are familiar with recognizing the peoples for whom this was and still is home, a part of who they are, far more deeply than some of us who are a long time from the Valley can even comprehend. For me, I've come... This recognition is a new thing for me, especially living in Europe and coming back home. It's not something that I grew up with, and it's a new thing. But I've come to recognize that our knowledge of our own story, me of mine, you fellow Valley folk of yours, and our understanding of who we are as non-Indigenous Canadians is incomplete if we do not recognize the full story of this land, and of our Indigenous brothers and sisters. And so with that in mind, I do wish to recognize that we are gathered here today in Almonte, in this space, in this building, on unceded Algonquin territory, and that we are all called together in respectful, just relationship with one another and with this earth and all of her inhabitants. The reason we are gathered here on this unceded territory is to listen, engage with, learn, laugh with Cheryl Bear. And I'm going to let my friend Lauren Wilkinson introduce Cheryl. But I want to briefly introduce Lauren. This is one of those situations where somebody introduces the person who introduces the person who introduces the person. And it's hard to briefly introduce Lauren. Lauren and Mary Ruth Wilkinson are longtime teachers at Regent College in Vancouver. I've had the privilege of, I like to say, knowing them before I was born, because my parents went to college with Lauren and Mary Ruth. So they are longtime faces and presences in my life. And in the 1980s, they came out here to Waba. If any of you know where Waba is, White Lake area is where I grew up on the other side of Lanark County. And way back then, they came to the Valley, and I think that was your first visit to the Valley. So it's wonderful to have you back in the Valley again. Lauren and Mary Ruth are mentors and godparents to hundreds of Canadians, but also people around the world who care deeply about story, who care deeply about relationship, who care deeply about the land and what does it mean to dwell well in this place in which we are lived. Whether we are Christians or not, but those of us who are Christians, the facts, how do we, exploring what Scripture has to say about that, and how we really, scripturally, have no option but to seek to do that. Lauren and Mary Ruth live on an island, Galliano Island, in the Gulf Islands off of Vancouver, on a farm, and they take students out on classes, they don't just teach classes in the traditional classroom on children's literature or philosophy or Dante, arts, but they also teach courses in which students go out and row in boats around the Gulf Islands and sail around the Gulf Islands and discuss technology and creation and philosophy and theology and what does this mean and how does it apply to how we live. They teach a course called the Food Course, where they talk about what do we eat and why, what informs the decisions we make with our food, and how do we think about our food relationally? How does that affect our community, how we engage with who we are, our families? How do we sit at the table? Do we sit at the table? Why? Why is that important? So they're not your typical professors. And I know in their own desire to figure out how to live well in the world in which we live, how to live holistically in the world in which they live, they have shaped Cheryl in her journey, and even in her understanding as an Indigenous person. And so I hand over to my non-Indigenous friend and professor, Lauren, to introduce my Indigenous friend, Cheryl.
Well, thank you. You can forget most of that because this is not about me, it's about Cheryl. I met Cheryl as a student at Regent 20 plus years ago, I think, about 20 years ago. And I remember we don't get many Indigenous students at Regent, sadly. I hope there's more in the future. I was fascinated by Cheryl and her background, and we had conversations very early on which reaffirmed my own awareness of being, what we said this afternoon, is a Cascadian, somebody from the same, as it's been described, wherever the salmon can get to on the West Coast. And this afternoon, and then too, she was telling wonderful stories about the importance of salmon in her culture. Nothing like what I had experienced, but there was that sense of a kind of kinship through the place. As I got to know her, Cheryl told wonderful stories about her growing up as a part of, and I brought these books, which are for sale back there, which I highly recommend, a children's book and a book on ministry, but I brought them up here not to pitch them, but because I couldn't trust myself to remember the name of Cheryl's First Nation group in central or northern BC, depending on your perspective. She is from the Nadlahwatan First Nation in the northern part of BC, and has wonderful stories about that. But as we talked, and Regent is a school of Christian studies, of theological studies, One of the things I asked Cheryl is how you relate your life as an indigenous person, as a native person, to your Christian faith. And she said, basically, I keep them in different compartments. I'm a Christian with part of me, and with another part, I'm a native person, and I have a hard time putting them together. What's so exciting about coming back to Cheryl to read these books, to talk to her, is how much and how richly she has put them together in one compartment now. And in a sense, my own feeling about what it means to be a Christian is to discover what it means to be a full human being. And in many ways, what it means to be an indigenous person, as she'll share this, is to do what we all need to do, but find very difficult. And that is to relate to our place, to recognize that we are rooted in a place. We're meant to be rooted in a place. It's easier to learn that if you have a background like Cheryl's. And she's going to teach us about that, what it means to be fully human. And she'll be sharing that from her background as a member of the Linlathen First Nation. And so, Cheryl, I look forward so much to hearing you now.
Howdy, Suanda. Thank you very much for your kind words. My favorite prof, Lauren Wilkinson, and of course Mary Ruth, who's here. These two have definitely shaped my life, and I'm grateful that you were able to be here. And thanks, Regan, also for not even being just wandering in and being the sound guy. I appreciate it. Kirsten, before we get started, I would like to call you up. And just to say thank you for your welcome here, for your good words about the land, for the good conversation that we had in your room, on your bed. I've been in her bed. Rarely do you get invited into these close places, but I just felt like we could talk for days. And so I wanted to gift you, this is from Gladys. Her grandmother was Mary John, who wrote a book called Stony Creek Woman, Psychas. And I was talking with another person, I think Elise, about Psychas. So Mary John wrote this book, and this is her granddaughter who made this purse out of some beautiful West Coast. So I just wanted to gift this to you and say thank you in front of everybody. Hold on. And I didn't know who to gift these two gifts to, but the bag is from Bolivia. It's from the indigenous people there, who the folks nearby where we got this were diving into piranha waters and fishing with these great big beautiful nets, and one guy had like a big chunk taken out of him, but they were all just diving in. So that's where the bag comes from. But we had a conversation about this, and so there's a story behind it, is some soap. Now, there's not a hint or anything about this, but there is some, Lauren, no, you can't taste it, okay? Don't try that. Okay. But it's some bear grease soap, and the soaps, I'm going to give these both to you, because I don't know who likes pouches and who likes the soap, but the bear grease is medicinal to us, and it's harvested the elders use it all the time. It's kind of like hooligan grease on the very far coast where the hooligans are. This bear grease is like that to us. It's kind of like gold. So I'm going to bring these down to you guys to say thank you, and I appreciate you guys. And my cousin Beverly bakes it in her basement in Linlathen. So Hari Suanda, Cheryl Bear Slee, Linlathen Weston, Damdenu Slee. My name is Cheryl Bear, and I'm from the beautiful village of Linlathen. I am from the Bear clan. The traditional name to say our clan is Damdenu, and it means that I'm from a people. All my family, it's a matrilineal system. So if you're, my mom is from the Bear clan, my grandmother's from the Bear clan, and so I'm from the Bear. I'm in the Bear clan now. And in our potlatch system from the West Coast, we know we have. It's a huge, big story to tell you about that. So I won't right now. But everywhere that we go as Indigenous people, every time we have any sort of event, if it's a birthday party or if it's a memorial, if it's a church service, or if we're having a potlatch or a ceremony, if we're having a political meeting, if we're having a meeting with industry, a negotiation with industry, we always start with a prayer song. And I do this in schools as well. Some places have said to me, we know that you're a Christian. We know that I was a pastor at the time. They said, we don't want anything religious in the school that I was going to be speaking. And I said, well, then I can't come. And they were like, what? And I said, well, because it's Native. We start with prayer and we believe in the Creator and it's a part of our stories. And they were like, I said, it's our tradition. And they were like, okay then. So I get away with a lot because of that. But it really is. So we have. I remember we were meeting with a mining company, and so the CEO was there, and these other guys, they're lawyers. They were lawyered up, and we sat in the meeting. We had introductions, and then right away the CEO said, okay, so here's the first point we want to make, and just kind of the take charge kind of guy. And he's making big bucks. This is a multi-million-dollar worldwide mining company. And one of our elders said, stop. And I was kind of like, what's going to happen now? Like a kid eating popcorn, right? And the CEO was just didn't know what to do. He was like, what? Like, why? Nobody stops me. And the elder said, we need to pray. And so we all stood, and all these guys stood up, and they all prayed, and it sort of set them back on their heels a little bit, which was maybe a bit of a good thing. But to pray for Indigenous people is to acknowledge the one who made everything. And every single Indigenous community that I've been to, and I've been to about 600, more than 600 of the 1,000, what we used to say reservations or reserves in Canada and the United States. And I haven't been to one yet that does not have a name and a story of the Creator. And these are beautiful old stories that I've asked the elders, what do they mean? And they've said wonderful things to me. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But we always stand when there's a prayer song going to be sung. So I will ask you to stand. And this song is a prayer song that doesn't have any words, just a chant. And the chant doesn't translate into anything, but it represents the deepest cry of our heart. So in my travels, I've asked the different elders, because I've gotten a lot of questions in my life about what it means to be Native. And so I remember being a 13-year-old kid, 14, something like that, in a church, and a person in the church came up to me and said, "Oh, you're Native." And I was always very proud to be Native. I never denied it, even though I knew that as soon as I said, "Yes, I'm from Linlathen," I knew that right away the brow would furrow and the person would become pensive, and this was part of the normal part of being Native and Christian. And sure enough, it happened. So I said, "Yes, I'm from Linlathen," and the brow furrowed. And the person asked me, they said, "Oh, you're from Linlathen." He said, "Oh, don't Native communities have a lot of darkness?" And so I'm like 13, right? I'm like, oh. So I wish I could go back to my 13-year-old self and answer that lady and say, "Yes, at night." Because the assumption has always been that our land, our ways, our instruments, our chants were suspect. And, when in doubt, throw it out. And so we threw away in the history of colonization in Canada and the United States a lot of the beauty of Indigenous people and a lot of the beauty of the culture without asking some good questions first. So I had gotten asked these questions when I was younger, so I went to some of the elders and I said, "Can you tell me the story of the Creator amongst our people?" My own people, I asked first. And there was an elder who wrote a book called The Carrier of My People. Her name is Lizette Hall. She passed away. I got to meet her a couple of years before she passed, and she was well into her, maybe even into her 90s. And she talked about the Creator in this book. The name of the Creator in the Dakel First Nation. Dakel means the people who travel on the water. That's what our nation's name is. Linlathen, my community, Linlathen means the place where the salmon return. So Lizette Hall talked about the Creator. The name of the Creator is the being up on high. And she didn't put the traditional name in the book. And there are reasons for that. But I asked her when we were in person, and she had heard from her dialect, and then I learned what it was from my dialect. And one of the elders said from my community, "Oh, I remember hearing that. I haven't heard that for a long time, the name Yudagi, which means the being up on high." And she told a story about how there is great respect given to the Creator. And so I've asked different communities, and without... seriously, not one said, "Oh no, we don't have a Creator. We just believe in the rocks and trees and stuff like that." So Pocahontas' Disney was a little bit off on that, because we all have this belief in the Creator. And there was one place where we went, and they had, there was missionaries that had been there for a lot of years, and they said, "Oh, these folks don't believe in a Creator. They have evil and good spirits, and they're all idols." And I was like, whoa, okay, maybe I finally found one that doesn't have a name or belief or a story of the Creator. And so I asked one of the elders there, and kind of, I don't know how I put the question, but I think I just was rephrasing from the lady and from the missionary. And this elder said, of course we believe in the Creator. And she said the name in their language, this beautiful name. And she said, "This is the one who starts everything, who made everything. And we start every day with prayer to the Creator." And in their language that she used, we start every day with prayer, and we acknowledge this one first. And I was so profoundly moved by that, but also a little bit hurt that those stories had not been asked, and those missionaries that had been there for a long time, over 50 years, they had so just ardently and bluntly told me that story about no Creator. And I just was a little hurt and very sad for them that they didn't get to hear these things. And people have even gone farther and said, "Oh, the Great Spirit," or all of the different, in Lakota, I love the translation from Wakanta Khan, it means the great mystery. Those are some of the names of God, but somebody once told me, "Oh no, those are all false gods. Those are idols, and you can't have anything to do with them." And I was like, "Oh, okay. Thanks for that." dictatorial statement. I say this all in my mind. I'm a very non-confrontational kind of person, and I walk away and don't talk to that person again. I'll say, "Oh, I'm glad you're a Christian. I'll see you in heaven, and hopefully not before then." But that comes from an interesting place. And I think that there are elders I mean the people who are the story keepers. An elder in a church is similar, but elders in a Native community is the person who is the most respected person in the community. We go to them for advice. When they talk, you stop everything and you listen. We revere our elders. Backing up to what I was just saying, which was, somebody can help me, because I've lost it. My rabbit trail led me down this path, and I'm like, okay, so the Creator, yes, talking about these elders, these questions come from a place. Now, when you get a statement like, "Oh, that's all idolatrous," that's wrong. That's an opinion, maybe an assumption, but it's based on something, right? It's based on a belief that we need to be careful about God. We need to be careful about respecting the one true God. It's all through the Bible, right? Have no other gods before me. This is very clear. So I respect that. But the serious questions are not asked. And I in Bible school, I remember one of the profs saying, and when I went to Pacific Life Bible College for my bachelor degree, one of the profs said, "How do we know our God is the one true God?" And I was like, good question, because that's what people have asked me about Native stuff. And the answer was, we know God by the attributes. So God is good, God is love, God is just. And God doesn't change, right? God doesn't lie. So if we see something, like in the Old Testament, for example, Baal or Molech, and they're acting just bonkers, right? Like they're asking their people to do like really bizarre stuff. And bad stuff, too, like with kids and sacrifice and like Abraham hearing the voice of God to sacrifice his son would have been normal to that day and age. The abnormal thing was when he said, "Stop." That was the difference between the God we serve and the false gods in those days. So we know who God is. We know what God is like. So I asked the elders these questions, and the answers that I got back were that God is the one who started everything, the one who made everything, so the Creator, the one who watches over us, the one who cares about us, the one who answers our prayers, the one who speaks to us through creation, gives us signs like an eagle in the sky is a good sign. And some of those themes, I'm kind of like, that doesn't sound not Christian. That doesn't sound like something against what we believe. And even the whole nature speaking to us. I mean, that's very Christian. That's general revelation, right? Where the first way that God has made himself known to all of us is through creation. So, and I think that, and then, of course, the special revelation or specific revelation is that God is revealed perfectly through the person and work of Jesus. Of course, that's just systematic theology A, right? General and specific revelation. And I think that one of the people who I think have spoken most well about the land and how the land speaks about God has been Lauren Wilkinson. In my journey through Regent College, I think that he sort of just told the story of the land and sort of gave witness to or revealed maybe some of the silent witness of the earth in some ways. Although it speaks to us, maybe some of us have stopped hearing. So as I've leaned into what does it mean to be Native and Christian and thinking about some of these tough things, one of the names for God is Tekanshala, which in Lakota means grandfather. And it always kind of freaked me out because I was raised a very conservative style church, but that's been one of the names of God that has given me some of the most devotional times, that this love of God is ancient, that this love of God is something like grandparents. They're so bizarre, right? When they meet their grandbaby, they just change. And like my dad just let my kids get away with. I was like, you didn't let me get away with that. Who are you? What? They're so nice to this kid. Yeah. And not that I wasn't, but the grandfather heart of God, I think, is a beautiful way to say in Daniel 9, the ancient one, this old, old love. And so I'm going to sing a song called Creator Father in my journey of trying to make sense of who God is. From an Indigenous perspective, this song came out. When I was 8 years old, I became a Christian at a summer camp, and I didn't really know too much about Jesus, but I was really afraid because they kept yelling about this place called hell, and I really didn't want to go there. So I thought, okay, how do I become a Christian and just stay out of that place? And so these are my early formative years, and I always tell the story wherever I go that my view of God was kind of like the Lord of the Rings, Eye of Sauron. That, when it comes and you're in the gaze and it's like, it's terrifying. And that was sort of my early days view of God, because it was like, if you sin and if you just don't sin, but if you do, you die, then you're just going to go right. It's just kind of this terrifying thing. I was like 8. So having these early years was very, very sort of traumatic. I remember praying at night and just crying like, oh God, don't send my brothers to hell. Please send me instead. And I was just so, I would be crying away. And fortunately I had not unfortunately, fortunately I had a really great librarian in the school that I went to, Austin Road Elementary in Prince George. And I was reading a lot of books. I would read a few novels every night, and this librarian could hardly keep up with me. And one day she goes, how about this book? And she puts it in front of me, and it was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Okay. So I went home and I read it, and as I was reading it, I was like, oh my goodness, as the story unfolds, I'm like, oh. And so now I say to churches, if you have not wept at the stone table with Susan and Lucy, then I question your salvation. Because it was so powerful. So it was like one of those moments of, oh, I get it. And for me to have Jesus come into my life as Aslan, as the lion, was so powerful. And I honestly think that saved my Christian walk, my Christian faith. Because honestly, I don't know. Well, it's impossible. It's impossible to be in a relationship with someone who's always mad at you. Am I right? And who's just kind of like, couldn't you have done that better? Like, what's wrong with you? That was the view of God that I had before. And so to meet Aslan and to meet Jesus in this whole other way was so disarming to me. And I think that's the beauty of art. It's so subversive, that the power of a story to just transform our lives. And so in looking back and thinking about my early years, I think that story helped and really, really helped me and really saved me and sort of challenged me also. Now I'm starting to think about, how do I write about Jesus in a native way? What and who is the native Aslan, the indigenous Aslan, or indigenous people? So I read these books when I was younger in elementary school, and my little brother just lent me the CD cassette of the Narnia series. And some of the voices are not my favorites. Some of you are like, oh, yeah, right? But because I so love the story, it sort of overcomes my sort of upsetness at this voice. But you know, when I was, so I'm driving through the Fraser Canyon, because my drive was from Linlathen all the way to Vancouver. And I did this quite a few times for meetings, because I was a counselor in Linlathen, not the kind of counsel that cares about people. It's a political position. That's my joke. That's my political joke. But it's the counselor position. So I had to do these negotiations. So I was driving. So one of these times I'm listening, and every time Aslan shows up in any of these stories, I start crying. So I'm driving through the Fraser Canyon, and I'm, going 100, and I'm like, oh, Aslan, and I'm like, this is probably not a good idea to be driving right now. But just the beauty of that story, that it brought me back to not only my childhood, but this point of grace, right? And of this, and he's not a tame lion, and all of these wonderful aspects of the story that just so moved me. So that's been a little bit of my journey of learning about who God is, but then this compartmentalized life that I lived, where being native was, like I said earlier, was not okay in the church. And when I got questions like the darkness question, or another question was, oh, those earrings you're wearing, I had some beaded earrings on, and I was a younger person again, and somebody said, are those native earrings? Yes. Oh, yes, they are. And then the question became, oh, but don't those have evil spirits? And I was like, I hope not. But I learned something from those questions, and that was to never wear those earrings again, to try to just ride under the radar. And being in in Prince George town, and being one of the only brown faces in that church, it's pretty hard to ride under the radar. It's pretty hard to escape some of those questions, and I really, really tried. And now I think it's a good thing, because every setting that I'm in, whether I'm on the board of something, or I'm in a group, or I'm in some kind of a setting, a group of pastors, or in a church like this, where I'm the only native person, it changes stuff. Something happens when a native person is in the room. Everybody is kind of like a little bit like, oh, you can't say the same things that you maybe normally would feel free to say. And so I love, there's a saying out now that says, that's Indigenous people, I've heard a few times, it says, nothing about us without us. And I think that's really powerful. So to talk about Indigenous issues in the church, and to have, I think it brings up stuff, but it's good also to have a native person there as a witness. One of the one of the things that we have in the potlatch ceremony and community is that we have somebody who's hired as a witness, and they are to remember what happened there in that place. And it's a really good, it's a sort of a challenging thing, but it changes things. And I have always felt like in my life, like, oh, come on, like I'm in grade 8. How do I know about anything to do with Native people? You know, and I would get asked the questions all the time, and I was like, huh? And I remember being in grade 6 and the teacher one time talking about Hurons. And they just sort of like completely ignored the fact that there were a couple of Native people in the class, that we could have talked about the Native land that we were on. We could have acknowledged the land, and, you know, but there was a sort of, I think it's a bit of systemic, maybe racism and for sure discrimination that just sort of was in the system, that it was like, if we don't talk about you in the room and we talk about something far away, then perhaps it won't be real to us, and it won't be quite so hard to talk about it. So they talked about the Hurons when I was in grade 6 social studies, and I remember the teacher saying, you know, we think they're extinct. And I was like, oh, dang. And I was kind of like looking around like, oh no, and I felt horrible for them, but I was like, well, I'm right here though, but then I never could say, well, what about our people? What about my folks? Let's talk about us, because there was so much pressure to not do that, and lucky for the Hurons though, I met a few since then, and they're alive and well. And I told them, I was doing a concert in Wendake one time, and I said, my grade 6 social studies teacher told me you guys were extinct, and they're like, ugh. I'm like, I know, right? So some of that stuff, some of the misinformation, it's rampant in Canada. And I just was speaking at First Baptist Church in Vancouver. It's one of the biggest historical, most wonderful, beautiful church. Right across it is St. Andrew's church, and they both look like castles. And one of my sons, maybe a few years ago, he was like, hey, they should put catapults on top and like have a battle. But I was talking to them about systemic racism and how it's become a part of who we are. And I threw this out there to the church because I want to be this safe place where folks can talk to about this stuff. So I said some of the things that are misunderstandings, like Indians get everything for free. And of course, any person that's from India is like, wait, what? Huh? Are you talking about me or what? Because, we were misnamed. Columbus was lost. He was looking for those guys, and he found us. So that's what happened. That's why we got the name Indians. But there's a comedian who says, we're just glad they weren't looking for turkey. Such a dumb joke. I'm so sorry. That's such a bad joke. It's a very old joke. It goes back to the 70s. There's a Native comedian who actually said that. So now some of the values. I'll get back to my talk here. And there's a clock there. Is that clock correct? No? It's not 20 after 8? Oh, sure. I got lots of time, yes. I'm melting in my wool blanket up here, so it's if I disappear, it won't be a shaman thing. It'll be just science that I have melted. It might be a bit of a witchy thing, for sure, too. My sons call me the Blair Mom Project, so. It's our love language. It's a really twisted, but it's the way I'm like, my voice, yes. So, but now I want to talk to you a little bit about Native values, and the values. Again, there's a lot of sort of misunderstanding, misrepresentation that happened way back, and some of these things like, okay, I was talking about Indians get everything for free and the whole taxes stuff. We don't pay taxes, and when I hear the term we get everything for free, I'm like, yes, it's awesome. We're just, living the life. And it's just not true, right? Those things but somehow they can sit in a Canadian's mind and sort of like just ride there with no challenge, nothing to challenge that and say, hey, that's not true. Like, I pay a lot of taxes and I don't get everything for free. That's wow. But stuff like that, to challenge those things and to re-ask some of those questions about what we think about Native people is another big part of what I think. I think Canada is probably 50 years ahead of the U.S. now, maybe more in the last few years, couple of years. But for sure, because of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, because the Indigenous people took Canada to court, all that stuff happened, and the Prime Minister Stephen Harper apologized on behalf of Canada, and that sort of in 2008 sort of like highlighted everything. So now Canadians know about the residential schools, or are learning, and it's been 10 years since that apology, and that's miles ahead. In the States, they're still kind of where we were at 20 years ago, where I would speak in a church about the residential school, and folks would be like, "What's that?" You know, and those were tough days. And 50 years ago, even tougher. But I'm going to sing a song called "Shine Forth," and it was written by the guy who produced my CDs. His name is Graham Ward. He's actually from Wales. Wonderful guy. Hardly understand him. No, I'm just kidding. We had a lot of fun because he's just got this great sense of humor and helped me to walk through the daunting process of making a CD. And so this was his song, and he wouldn't record it. It's an amazing song. He would sing it different places, and a lot of people were like, "Do you have that recorded?" And he was waiting, and he let me record it before he did, which was very, very cool. When I heard this song, I was like, dang, that just sounds like a lot of those themes that he was talking about from a Christian perspective. I just thought, that just sounds so native. So I'm going to sing the song for you. Welcome, a stranger, give an orphan hope, visit a prisoner, help a widow cope, then your light will shine forth like the sun, and your light will shine on everyone. Give away your money, heal the broken hearts, feed the hungry belly, forgive the one who hurts, and your light will shine forth like the sun, and your light will shine on everyone. Speak out for the speechless, love the one who's weak, give shelter to the homeless, serve the one who's least, and your light will shine forth like the sun, and your light will shine on everyone. Throw away vain arguments, falsehood and deceit, pound the drums for righteousness, let injustice cease, and your light And so in talking about what it means to be Native and to be Christian, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the residential schools. This was, so I talked about this a little bit earlier, that most of Canada knows about this and it's an uncomfortable part of our history. It's almost like the dirty little secret that for so long it just nobody knew about it. I remember years ago, probably 20 years ago, talking to a church in, I forgot where it was, but kind of small town Canada, and one of the elders came up to me, and he would have been right around the same age as my uncles who went to this school. And, this happened in two different occasions. So one guy said, my best friend was Native, and they lived on an intersection, and across the street was where the reserve, the First Nations community, the land ended, and then he lived in sort of the white community. And he said, I always wondered where my friend went during the school year. But there was never any answers to those questions. And because my elders didn't want to talk about the residential school. It was so hard for them to talk about it because of so much shame being put on them for being Native and in the language. So I know a little bit of my language, but I'm not fluent. My 83-year-old auntie is fluent, but we have fewer and fewer fluent speakers. And part of it is because the generation above her were taught, if you want your kids to do well in Canada, you better speak English to them. And so there is all this shame that was put onto Indigenous people. And it's really sad that when the government instituted started these schools, that they had to use the church to run the day-to-day operations. And the whole one of the things about the apology from the Prime Minister is that the acknowledgement that these schools were not for the benefit of kids, to train the kids. Most of the students, their memory of what they learned there was catechism. They hardly, and farming. They were raising a lot of their own food and stuff. And so it wasn't the school where you just sat and you learned, your ABCs and whatever, history or whatever. The policy of these schools was a policy of assimilation. And the policy, and it goes beyond that too, it's extermination was the idea. And this is rooted way, way back in a Christian doctrine called the doctrine of discovery and manifest destiny. It goes way, way back, and it's sort of like sunken into the psyche of Canada and the United States, that Indigenous people are kind of conquered. And I've even heard this from people, well, you're a conquered people, why don't you just get over it? And I'm sort of like, whoa, there's this another misconception, right, that sort of is out there. And we were never conquered. We were talked about, they talked about treaties with us. They had people who signed the treaty, sometimes who weren't even in leadership, who didn't have maybe the ability to understand these things. There were so many things that happened that were based in untruth, and it was, and unfortunately now, when Indigenous people think about the gospel, when we think about the story of Jesus, there is hurt there, and there is, nope, I don't want any part of that white man's gospel. I don't want any part of that, and it's because it goes back to those deep roots. And I'll let you sort of Google Manifest Destiny and the Doctrine of Discovery. Some of them are Indigenous people even talk about Christian or church supremacy. And it's just sort of like, it's so uncomfortable to talk about those things. But they're very much a reality for Indigenous people today to talk about that stuff. And just to be honest, and one of the things that happened to me was I was headed up to Bible school, and I had my backpack on, and I was going to go catch the bus. And I lived in a Native housing building on First and Commercial in Vancouver. And I was leaving, and there was an elder there that was working on his bike, and he said, "Hey, you're going to school." And I said, "Yeah, and he goes, "Good for you." He goes, "I'm so proud of you." And I was like, I was so happy. And he said, I wish, I'd see that more often, and so on. And he goes, what school do you go to? And he was so happy. And I said, Pacific Life Bible College. And right away he got really sad. And he said, why would you go there after what they've done to our people? And I just felt the weight of that question. And I knew where it came from. And this was in 1994 or something like that. 95. And I knew that I couldn't just give a little, easy answer because I had to catch a bus and I was going to be late for school. But I just prayed in my mind, Jesus, help. And something came into my mind, and I told this elder, I said, the story of Jesus is much older than our contact with Europeans. And he was a little surprised at me. And then I've since then have worked on that a little bit more. And I started telling people, well, it wasn't until Regent that there was one pastor in Pacific Life Bible College, it was Barry McGaffin, who asked me a really tough question about contextualization. And he said, what does this have to do with your people? And I was a little bit, I don't know, in 96. Then I met Richard Twist in 1997, who unpacked a lot of what it means to contextualization, what that means for Indigenous people. What I'm doing right now is contextualization, putting Jesus in the context of an Indigenous person. But it wasn't until Regent College that Stan Grantz said to me, why don't you write, like I was writing on a paper on the Holy Spirit, and he said, why don't you write this from a Native perspective? And I was like, and there my two worlds were like, I was like, okay, this is Native over here, and this is Christian over here. And I learned from those questions, and when I was a kid, that you do not bring that. You just keep them over here. You go to the powwow, and you be happy you're a Native, and then you're at the powwow. And then you go to church, and then those, So Stan Grantz, and I'm like, oh, man. And then, of course, that same year, having Lauren talk about the land and sort of unpacking some of the theology of the land and sort of feeling like, oh my goodness, I felt as a Native person like I could love the land. But as a Christian, some of the stories were, and he even said this in class, a lot of Christians will say, well, why do we need to care about the land? Because it's all going to burn anyway. And I was like, dang, I've heard that so often, and it always kind of ticked me off. And it made me very sad because I love Notley, right? Like I love that land. So, and to me, it's not a dark place. It's a beautiful place. There's tough things that happen there, but it's a beautiful place. And it's a place where I have heard the Creator in the rapids, and I've heard the Creator in the wind in the trees, and something calling to me, and not really knowing what that is. But those things, when it comes to the residential school, that's what that elder was talking about. When he questioned me about that, he was bringing it right back to his experiences in residential school. And I had an elder who gave me permission to share her story that she said she never ever wore shorts or a skirt. And one day she was, because it was a really hot day, and she thought her grandkids are gone all day, so she could finally put on some shorts. And she's in a place in Canada that's really hot, so like what it's going to be like on Sunday. And but so she wore these shorts, but then her grandkids came back from where they were and surprised her. And she was happy to see them, but then they said, Grandma, what's that on your knees? And she realized, oh no, and she never wanted to tell them the story, so that's why she never had the shorts or skirt. But here she had to. When she was a little girl, she doesn't remember what she did wrong in residential school, but they brought her into the chapel, and they brought her up to a certain pew, and they have the kneeling benches. And they said, kneel here, and you're going to pray for forgiveness. And so she went to kneel down, and as she kneeled, as her knees came near the prayer bench, she realized she felt nails that were sticking up from those benches. And she jumped, and she screamed in pain, and she was hit. And she went down on those again, and she had to kneel on those nails and pray. And she still bears the scars to this day. And I think she was a little girl and just a baby. And that was torture. That was a torturous mechanism. It wasn't discipline. It wasn't anything near that. It was awful. And just that tiny story there, it's quite easy for the rest of us to see why that elder would say, how can you go to that school after what they've done to our people? And then to tell the elders now, as I start to learn about Jesus and I start thinking about Jesus in these new ways, and I can tell my elders, you know what? Jesus was from the tribe of Judah. He was a brown-skinned man, and he lived under a dominant, oppressive, foreign government that wanted to exterminate his people. There's a story for you. How do you feel about that story? And Indigenous people can say, I never knew that about Jesus. Why don't you tell me more? And because we never have heard that story. It's been an imperialistic story that has been held by a different people group and used to wield power over my people. The gospel, that was this beautiful story, the most beautiful story that I've ever heard, that for God so loved, for the Creator so loved this world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him would not die but would live forever. That's a beautiful story. And I, as a Native person, who my earliest memories are standing around a grave and knowing what it means to lose, knowing what it means to experience death year after year after year, to hear life forever, please tell me more about that story. But the story was never given as a gift and placed in the indigenous soil of this land to be brought up to grow on its own, to grow indigenously. But rather, this story was used as a tool or a weapon of assimilation. And I wrote a song, and it took me a couple of years to be able to sing this song all the way through. And the song came out in 2007. It's the story, it's called The Residential School, and it's the story of the first mother and son who were ever separated by these schools. My son, when you went away, you were so young and strong. I just couldn't wait for the day to have you back home where you belong. The only thing that kept me alive was knowing I would see you again. There was no way for me to know you'd come back, a man I don't know. My son, where did you go when they took you away? My son, where did you go when they took you away? I don't recognize you anymore. The scars of a life are deeper than before. Mother, when they took me away, I looked back to my home. You know, I really wanted to stay when I thought of you there all alone. The only thing that kept me alive was knowing I would see you again. There was no way for me to know I'd come back to an alcoholic home. Mother, where did you go when they took me away? Mother, where did you go when they took me away? I don't recognize you anymore. The scars of life are deeper than before. This is a tough song to sing. It's a tough story to tell. It's an even tougher story to live, to have lived. These residential school survivors and the courage that they have to bring Canada to court. And it took so long for it to go up to the Supreme Court that a lot of the elders who initially started this, the lawsuit, a lot of them passed away. And I'm so grateful for their courage and their strength to keep telling the story and to keep coming at it and not to give up, because now everybody knows. And it's one of the, I just saw a Lutheran pastor online who talked about Armageddon, and she said that the word Armageddon actually means revealing the truth, sort of like showing things for what they are. And I think that that's happened in Canada, and it's so tough, but it's so beautiful as well. To be able to tell these stories, and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission went on for a lot of years, and I know that some of you guys have been to some of those, you've heard the stories of the residential school survivors. People actually ask me, I don't know, it just sounds like it's too bad to be true. Like, how could it have been that bad? And I'm just like, I know, right? I know, I get it. And all across Canada for the similar story to be happening, where the gross injustice of abuse went so far as just awful and sexual abuse, and it's horrible what happened in these schools. And I'm once again grateful for the residential school survivors to tell this story. And we use the word survivors, and it was them actually that asked when they won the world's largest class action suit against the government. When they won this, they asked as part of the settlement for the Truth and Reconciliation. They asked for that. The victims of some of the most horrific crimes against children asked for reconciliation with their perpetrator. And that is the heart of Indigenous people. That is the heart of the elders. And when I hear people, when I'm asked to talk, and it's so tough to tell these stories, it's kind of re-traumatizing, but I'm like, yes, I'll tell these stories because I want to walk in the footsteps, in the grace and the beauty of my ancestors, of my elders who had so much courage to tell these stories. So yes, let's tell these stories. And I just did an event, and this pastor said, I thought you were going to give us is it reconciliation? We're talking about the truth and reconciliation. And I thought you were going to give us 5-point steps to reconciliation with Indigenous people. And I said, oh yes, I can answer that definitively on behalf of all Indigenous people for all time and all of Canada. You're welcome. But no, that's tough, because I just kind of felt like that 5-point, can you just give me 5 points? Because, I've got a lot of stuff to do and the weekend is coming. And it's like, no, this is going to be a lifetime for most of us. And it's such a journey. Reconciliation is not a destination, but it's just a journey that we're on. And there's no easy answers. I think that we need to sit. A lot of people want to just jump to the reconciliation. And I remember this from Region 2. Eugene Peterson says that when it comes to Easter, we just want to so quickly go from Good Friday, let's run off to Sunday morning, to Easter Sunday, and get rid of all the messy stuff and just have the happy resurrection day. But he said to sit in Friday and Saturday, and to sit in that devastation, that sorrow and grief, and deal with that sometimes. The man of sorrows, which I as a Native person have never related to a name of God more than the man of sorrows. That set me free. But to sit with some of these stories, some of the tragedies and the trauma and the grief, and that Indigenous people, I think Canada is still going to be dealing with the truth part of the Truth and Reconciliation for a lot of years, because there's still a lot of folks who still don't know the truth. And so I think we're going to work on that for a bit, and I'm going to continue telling these stories, and because I know that they're heartbreaking. They break my heart. And I know that to really know somebody, to really understand what a people group has been through, we need to hear the stories. And so I'm so grateful that you guys are here to to listen to me and to share some of these stories. I haven't even talked hardly at all about the land, and that's kind of what maybe the lecture was supposed to be about. But people tell me, and afterwards, inevitably somebody will tell Kirsten, I thought she was going to sing more. I wanted some more because it looks like song. But then other people will say, I thought she was going to talk more. So I hear that a lot, and I'm just like, I'm sorry, folks. I'm just going to do whatever I want. But I did write another song because I in the person of the Man of Sorrows, I felt like, maybe this one could understand me. Maybe this one could love me. And there's a grief chant on the northwest coast of BC that is Anana, and it doesn't have any translation again, but it is a cry of grief that you'll hear. And Anana, when I think about some of the sorrow of Indigenous people, and like I said, a significant death every year of my life. And I don't know that it's because we have so many social issues, social problems, and I don't think it's because of that. I think it's because we're so connected. Kind of like you guys. Oh my goodness, she's going, this is this, and this, all these people on 6th line. 7th line, yes, and but she's from 6th line. Yeah, so there, I was like, oh, there's a bit of a thing there. But we're connected. I know people from Natle. I know people from Linlathen, from Saikaswatan, from Nakasli. I know folk. We know everybody, and so we feel things deeply. So grief is a big part of life, and we still are very connected as well to that part of. And I want to write a little bit more about death because I think from an Indigenous perspective, I think we have a lot of experience with it, and I think that writing about it in a good way will help. I think some of us, because from my journey in being a young girl and being terrified by death, and now becoming an older person, I'm turning 50 this year, so I'm really up there. Just a joke for some of you who are over that. You're like, haha, baby. Which, please, yes, call me baby. But I sort of feel like my relationship to death has changed, and I want to write about that because I think I know I get a few more things. But this song is called "Heal Me," and I think to me the key to the healing of Indigenous people in Canada and the United States is identity. Identity. What does it mean for us to be Indigenous people? What does it mean for us to hear words that I spoke to an elder one time, to a group, and this elder had been a Christian for about 60 years. And she came up to me and she said, I have never heard those words before in my life. All I had said was, I named her people. I said, Nishka are created in the image of God. And she had never heard that before. And we have this identity. Everybody has sort of self-esteem, identity issues, but Indigenous people have got, because of the history of colonization, a little bit more we need to work on. And I think that is the key. And if we can do that within the church, to bring some of that healing and some of that reconciliation, that'll be big. That'll be a big step in that direction. So this song is called Heal Me. Oh, and one more thing. I'll close with this, I think. Every single one of us experience grief and loss. Every one of you in this room, in some ways, devastating stuff. And life is not easy for us. So loss is a tough thing. And I remember hearing, when I heard this chant for the first time, this Anana, and it just broke my heart. And I thought, my soul has made that sound so many times. And when I think about the story of God and God reconciling with man, that the creator of the universe would come to us in as vulnerable a form as a newborn baby, that if somebody brought a newborn baby into this room, all of us would melt. You could corner a biker, like the biggest boy in the room, with a newborn baby. He'll go, no, 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 and they're terrifying, right? That's how our Creator came to us. Not in strength and power and might, but in this very vulnerable way. That's the heart of the Creator. And I think that when we cry this cry of grief, the words don't come out of our mouth and fall to the ground, but rather the one that the Bible says collects our tears in a bottle. There's a picture. This one hears our cry of grief and comes close to us, quickly to us, to be near us. When darkness and despair like a shroud overwhelms me,